We love Zencaster because it allows us to record the audio for our podcast and create the video segments we use for our weekly Sister Scoop episodes. Zencaster has helped us make content capture simple.
It's now super easy to record a podcast with Zencaster. Log in using your browser and start recording a high-quality podcast right away. Record studio quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests, and feel a sense of zen knowing Zencaster's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable.
If you've thought about podcasting before and realized that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencaster's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast in one place and distribute it to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations.
Just go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code SistersAssembled, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencaster paid plan. We want you to have the same easy experiences we do for all of our podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story.
Katie and I are always hungry, and one snack we both love is beef jerky. That's why we're so excited to tell you about one of our favorite jerky brands, Matt Hat Jerky.
Matt Hat's delicious taste makes it a great snack, and the variety of flavors, including original, black truffle, and my personal favorite, roasted garlic, means there's a flavor for everyone. Plus, it's local to the area where we grew up in, which we just love.
Use the link in the show notes below to get some Matt Hat Jerky for yourself, and make sure to use our coupon code SistersAssembled for 10% off. Hello and welcome to Sisters Assembled, your home for all things MCU. And excitingly, this episode kicks off the first bit of our many weeks of Daredevil Born Again coverage. As y'all know, if you have been paying any attention to any of our episodes over the last about year, you know this is the property that I'm probably most excited about, with the exception of Fantastic Four this year. So it is going to be a great few weeks / few months for me. I am super excited and I cannot wait to kick off our coverage for Daredevil Born Again. So, because we've got our predictions coming at you today, I'm going to let Katie kick it off, and we're going to start diving into a little bit of background, a little bit of recapping, and talking about maybe what might happen in the show.
This is going to be such a fun thing because this is the first time we have a show that was not made by Marvel, but made in association with them, that not only has had one season, it's had 3 seasons. We've had this character already appear in the MCU now, and now we're finally getting both a first and 4th season to this show under Marvel as a whole. And I think it's going to be so strange, but I hope it's going to be pulled off so well. And I think with the trailers so far, I will say, I think it's keeping the tone. It seems to be, from what just people in general have seen of it so far, a lot of people are agreeing, like it seems to be matching up to what we've seen in the first 3 seasons, which, let's be real, is really the hardest part about this. This wasn't initially going to be a continuation. This was going to be essentially a soft reboot of Daredevil. And they tried it and it didn't work out. And so they brought back Foggy and Karen and all these characters that they were not planning to have in this show. So while I think it was the right decision, there's a lot riding on it to be just as good, and for fans to be able to watch seasons 1 through 3 and then watch 4 or Born Again right after and not have any issue doing that.
Yeah, it is definitely an interesting scenario. It's kind of actually similar to the Deadpool of it all, because that too was like made by another studio in association with Marvel, you know, in the 21st Century Fox house. Then obviously the rights to that character were acquired, and they made the 3rd, which is, you know, a continuation of the franchise, but yet had its own spin and had its own MCU flair to it. So I think that's like another kind of parallel that you can make of Marvel kind of getting, I don't think they ever lost the rights to Daredevil. I just think, if I'm remembering correctly, they just used Netflix as kind of their production house. But, you know, getting these characters back and bringing all of the work in-house and saying, no, we're going to do this and we're going to own it. Now, it is interesting because if you take the Deadpool concept, they actually did something similar based on what we've seen in the trailers and what we've heard about the show. There's a big gap between the last property or the last project that we saw under the other studio and where we pick up with these characters, same characters, but many years later in the MCU. And so that's kind of, I think, what is hopefully going to be the thing that smooths out what you were saying, that kind of transition, is that yes, those 3 seasons on Netflix were a contained story with the character and it ended, right? There was an end there. But at the same time, we're able to pick back up. If you do the math, that was 2018. We're talking probably 2025, 2026, where we are in the MCU right now. So 7 or 8 years later, and you're able to say, all right, I see how that story finished. I'm picking up with the same characters. They're able to reference the things that happened in the previous seasons without it necessarily being like a direct, okay, well, now we're picking up right after season 3 and everything that happened there. There's going to be through lines. We know that Bullseye is in this. Obviously, you see that conversation between Daredevil and Kingpin himself, or Matt Murdock. He's Matt Murdock at the time in the diner, and they're talking and they're referencing about the many times they've tried to kill each other. So there are clearly going to be recognition of the first 3 seasons, but yet because of this time gap, Blip and Snap included, they're able to also make it their own.
I think the best thing to pick up there, because I agree with everything you said, I think the best thing there, though, to pick up on is actually the Snap and Blip part. This is, and Daredevil was a great comparison because I think it follows the same idea. The Snap and Blip happens in universe here. And that's been confirmed. That is what they confirmed when they were telling us the time and where this takes place relatively, because of course we don't have like an actual time marker, because why would we in phases 4, 5, or 6 have a time marker? But regardless, we are told the rough timeline and we know the Snap and Blip happened in the middle. I think it's going to be interesting because we know that has to play some sort of a part into the story. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't really know too much about if there's been confirmation about who's been snapped, who hasn't been. I think we tried to say that we thought Kingpin and Daredevil both were not, but we don't know about side characters.
Yeah, I think that was kind of our assumption coming out of Echo and the flashbacks that we got there, that we felt like they were kind of a package deal. Either they both snapped or they both blip, or they both snapped or they both didn't. And we kind of felt like we were both leaning in the fact that they didn't because there was a lot of stuff going on. It seemed like for both of them and just interactions that were happening in that time period, it seemed like they were both around. But you're right, we don't know what is going on with Foggy or Karen or Bullseye or any of those characters. You know, I would say based on what we've seen of trailers, it kind of seems like all these characters made it through unscathed. It just seems like they've had so many years of building their lives together and continuing to evolve those relationships that we saw in the first, 3 seasons. And just to know that 5 out of 8, 7 or 8 of those years would be gone if one of them was blipped, it just doesn't feel like there's that disconnect between, especially the main trio. It feels like they're all kind of coming from a shared experience versus like, oh, hey, like Matt and Karen, they didn't blip, but Foggy did. And now he has to catch up on 5 years. Like that wasn't the vibe that I was getting. So my guess when it comes to those guys is everybody made it through unscathed, which is statistically really, really not relevant or like rare, but it's fine.
It's weirdly lucky when you had an entire team of Avengers and they were strangely split down the middle. But
Yeah.
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But hey, that's just my guess. Maybe one of them did. I don't know.
I think too, though, for some of this stuff, well, I don't want to say it's a cop out. It does make it easier continuity wise to not have to write in that one of them did snap.
Yeah.
I think the thing is some of these characters, it's imperative for their story and the story you're going to tell with them in general. A great example of this would be Yelena.
Yeah.
Her being dusted, and also not just her actually being dusted, but the fact that in that time frame her sister died saving the world to bring her back was imperative to the rest of her storyline in something like Hawkeye, and I'm sure it's going to still be something that contributes to who she is in Thunderbolts. It's things like that are just so important to her character. And there are other characters too that, whether they were the ones who lived or didn't, I mean, half of Endgame, that is the whole premise of it,
Yeah.
of not just survivor's guilt, but just not knowing really how to move on. Is that not the whole therapy session that Steve is a part of in Endgame? It's like, how do you move on? How do you continue to move on during all of this? But then you do have the ones who were snapped. I mean, I think about when we watched The Falcon and Winter Soldier and how interesting it was to have the two leads in that show. actually be two of the people who were not on Earth, even though they're fighting the Flag Smashers, who are actively fighting and are angry over the fact that the people came back.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting because it was like they were the people who came back. It was a very interesting dichotomy, but like it brings a lot of levels to so many characters and it's important. But when you're essentially retconning something into a bigger universe, I feel like it almost makes it a little messy to have to worry about, to what you said. Did Foggy disappear for 5 years? Was he not here? Or did Karen disappear? Did they both disappear? It doesn't seem to matter. I do hope it's addressed because I think it's really hard to go about doing something like this and quite literally ignoring the elephant in the room,
Yeah.
which is the snap and blip. I know we're a little over it because it happened, what, like 6 years ago now? That is
7.
crazy to say.
7.
Well, but then the blip would have
Yeah,
been
7 for the snap, 6 for the blip.
yes. So for us, we're a little over it enough to be like, yeah, we're used to it. It's like anything that ever happens that's traumatic, like after a couple years, you're just kind of like, yeah, that unfortunately happened and it sucked. For the story, it was an amazing way to tell it. But like for us, like I'm traumatized, okay? But you start to kind of feel it less and less. And so I do think at this point in phase 5, as we're nearing the end of it, I do think kind of still trying to tell that story with characters who technically had no part in it. I don't know if we need to really go in depth, but I'd like to know. And to your point, statistically, yeah, if they all made it out, that's weird. That's pure luck, but also, it happens. Like I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like, it doesn't I don't want to diminish the characters of Foggy and Karen because they're very important to, like, who Matt is in the same way that anybody's friends are important to, their support system and helping guide them through anything. But the two people that we really need to know are Kingpin and Daredevil. Those are the people who are driving the narrative. Again, all these other characters are important, but when you look at the two leads, it's those two guys going head to head. And I'll be curious to see what happens. I think to your point, they are going to have to address it. I think that we're going to have to understand, at a very high level, what have these characters been doing over the last 6 or 7, or what did I say, 7 or 8 years? We're going to have to understand that. But at the same time, we don't have to spend an episode and a half talking about that. I think it's a couple of lines here and there, maybe sprinkled throughout the show just to give us a little bit of color and then moving right on. Like, I don't think we need to spend, the whole first couple of episodes. What are there? 10 episodes? 9 episodes?
I think there's 9.
Yeah, I think you might be right. I don't remember. But however
Because
many,
I think it was like 18, then 13, and now I think it's 9 because I think it went back to I know the episodes are longer than this, but I think it was the cadence of going to something like a WandaVision or Agatha.
yeah.
Because I think we've only ever done really the 9 or the 6 with live action.
Yeah, because I think they were going to do 18. I remember thinking to myself, they halved it. Like, they took the original set and put it in half. So, yes, I think you're right. I think it is 9. But my point is, we don't need to take the first third of the show to explore that and, like, rehash all of that information. I'd rather they move the narrative forward and sprinkle in, the context that we need to understand where these characters have been throughout, opportune moments in the story.
Yeah. And I think that's what I'm saying. What it needs to play a role, but it doesn't need to be like a conversational role.
Yeah.
But it definitely needs to play the role of what it's going to tell to these characters because they are now part of this bigger universe. And so we need to know some of it, but it doesn't need to be like, and I like how you said, we don't need to spend an hour or well, I guess it is kind of like an hour and a half, but we don't need to spend like an episode and a half sitting here and talking about it. It doesn't need to be done. I think the other thing we have to kind of discuss before we get into a little bit more of the details from trailers and where we actually think the season itself is going is also Kingpin and Matt have both made appearances. 2, both. In 2 different in 4 different properties, not across from each other. For those who don't fully remember, because I feel like Daredevils are a little further out, he was in She-Hulk, which was...
Oh, wait, Matt made 3.
Oh, you're right. I was going to list them too, and I wasn't even going to think anything of it.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, then they did have No, I was right, though. They had overlap.
They had overlapped one.
In Echo.
But Matt
So there
made
were
3
4
appearances.
properties.
Yeah.
Yes. So She-Hulk was, I think, his first one.
No Way
my God.
Home.
No. You know what? No Way Home has now come out so long ago.
I know.
It's wild to think. Like, I was still in college during that. That is wild. Okay. No Way Home for Daredevil. She-Hulk. And then a very, very brief appearance in Echo in which he was fighting Maya.
Great fight scene.
Yes.
Highly recommend you rewatch it if you haven't seen it in a hot minute.
Yes. Kingpin, on the other hand, made his first appearance in the MCU in Hawkeye, and then also was in Echo and was like a very pivotal role.
Yep.
I think, quite frankly, I'm not sure if No Way Home's part of this plays much of a role because we're not going to see Tom Holland appear in Daredevil.
No.
That's not going to happen. If we're going to get that crossover again, it will be in a Spider-Man property
Yep.
or a bigger team up.
Yep.
It's not going to be in Daredevil. She-Hulk, I don't think plays a role. It'd be wild, though, if Jen Walters showed up.
This show's too grounded for her. Like, for that
It
whole
is,
thing.
but a part of me kind of is like, for the continuity and the fact that you were putting this guy in a bunch of other, like, places, like, he didn't need to be in She-Hulk.
No.
No Way Home was a worthwhile place to kind of drop him in. He did not need to be in She-Hulk. So because of that, I'm kind of like, no, it'd be kind of cool if she just, like, appeared for a cameo and then was out. Like, those are those moments. Like, we just talked about it with Captain America. With, guys, this is a small spoiler if you have not watched the movie, but you care and don't want to hear this, so just close your ears for 30 seconds. But like with Bucky coming in,
yeah,
that was the perfect little cameo to be like, here's this connection still. This is still ongoing. This friendship is still ongoing. Connection from the Falcon and Winter Soldier. Also to the fact that Thunderbolts, which Bucky is going to be in next and be leading, is coming up in our movie list in 3 months. Perfect. This is what we used to do in the old MCU.
I know. I just like the actual, like, I'm thinking about a CGI She-Hulk showing up in the show.
I'm wondering if, like, maybe she does her little power down.
Yeah, or more likely, I think, is like her name shows up on a case or something like that, you know, because I could see like a Jennifer Walters popping up on some brief that he's looking at, and then you're like, oh, cute, here's a little Easter egg that shows the connection. I don't think they're gonna get Tatiana Maslany in for this show. I just don't.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be okay with the Easter egg of some sort or like a small mention, because I think even the Defenders universe on Netflix did a really good job at making small mentions to things that you're like, ah ha ha, I got that.
Yeah.
Because I just watched Jessica Jones, or like I got that because I just watched Iron Fist. So I do think like maybe doing something in connection to that is fair, but I also don't think we're going to need to worry too much about that. I'm going to skip to Kingpin really quick because I do think there's a single property that the overlap is going to be important. And so I'll save that one for last. Well, I think Hawkeye was definitely important. I think we've progressed the story already.
Mm-hmm.
And we progressed in Echo, which is the overlap story, which I think is going to be where we start here. And I shouldn't say I know this is going to be where we have to start here, because it is the only way we can place Daredevil in connection to Kingpin as of most recently for us. And we knew what Kingpin was up to at the end of Echo. We did an entire episode about it. He's going to be mayor.
I do think it's important to point out, you know, and I actually just did listen to our Mayor Kingpin episode just as a refresher because I knew we did some good research. Shameless plug, folks. We did have a nice chat about Mayor Kingpin in that episode. So if you haven't listened to that in a while, it's actually worthwhile. I was listening to it in preparation for this recording. So,
and I think we did that in like February of 2024.
Yeah, it was literally just over a year ago.
Yeah.
And so what I want to say is we talked about, oh, you know, I think that we're going to see his campaign and all of that. I don't think we're going to necessarily see that in the first couple of episodes other than in flashbacks, because what I want to point out here is there has to have been at least a pretty decent, maybe 6 months to almost 18 months, depending on where they were in the campaign cycle, time gap or time jump between that plane scene at the end of Echo and right now, because he is fully ensconced in being the mayor. So he has already, you know, he has already won. He's already gone through that period, that awkward period between the election and when he's actually, you know, sworn in. And he seems to be at least a couple of months into his term. So, you know, there's that to point out as well, that if we're looking at plotting this on a timeline, yes, you have the end of Echo that helps us see things and put it in context with some other properties, but then there is a little bit of a gap between Echo and where this show picks up the story.
Yeah, and I actually am a little upset, I have to admit, because I was hoping we'd see, and I remember our episode, and I know why we were hoping this, but I was kind of hoping we would see the whole election play out more now in Daredevil, because we were hoping to see more of the mayoral, like when he's actually holding office part of it in like a Spider-Man film. That's not obviously going to happen. I mean, to be fair, we don't really know what Spider-Man 4 is going to be about. There's rumor mill everywhere. Like, it was supposedly going to be more grounded, then it was suddenly going to be King in Black, and then now we still don't really know what it is, even though it apparently starts filming this summer. Like, fine, that's fine, but I think because we know that's kind of a next stop possibly for this general storyline, I think it's kind of it's going to be interesting that they chose to decide no, the whole mayor thing is happening here, because I feel like it might be keeping the doors shut on some of the defenders things instead of keeping them open for a wider universe.
Well, I actually would disagree because I think there's a way that they do this that opens the doors for a big thing for Kingpin to do. And I think I know what you're kind of getting at here. We talked about in our Mayor Kingpin episode, when he is mayor of New York, he basically puts a law in place that says that being a vigilante is illegal. We know he's going to make that push in this show because he makes an address literally saying, like, vigilantes are not heroes. He pretty much verbatim says that in one of the trailers. So we know this is kind of the sentiment that he's going towards. I think what has kind of evolved in at least my predictions for how this is going to play out and how his mayoral term is going to, affect the storyline is, instead of spending time seeing what his kind of stump speech is on the campaign trail, I think we're actually going to see him campaigning for support for this bill, this anti-vigilante bill. And I think if that doesn't actually go into effect until much later in the series, then you're going to be able to still set up a Spider-Man 4 where that directly affects Peter Parker and his ability to operate because he's now in Manhattan, instead of, it happening and being maybe undone within this season. The other thing there to think about is, you mentioned the other defenders. Okay, well, if this starts to go into effect, episodes 8, 9, you can then have another season of a Jessica Jones or a Luke Cage or an Iron Fist, and then see how it's affecting them as well. So I do think that if they go longer, if they play a longer game with that particular legislation, that it doesn't necessarily have to be affecting Matt this season, but can still be a driving plot line because he's clearly not going to agree with it.
That's fair. I think the reason I say that is because we know Luke Cage is the one who actually ends up being mayor after Kingpin.
Yeah, I think that'll be just delayed.
No, and I'm sure it will be. I just think my thought process is, knowing that that's kind of the easy next step, it actually seems like and I think your points are fair. I just think, from my perspective, by keeping the race out of it and it already being him as mayor, I feel like it's just keeping the door more open for the defenders. And I think it's also because we don't know where Spider-Man's fully going to go from here, but we don't yet know it's going to affect him at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus, like, if they play this out, no matter what way they play this out, theoretically, Luke Cage becomes mayor. This is still within the Defenders universe.
Yeah, for sure.
I think this is going to be a huge crux to this season.
Yes.
Don't get me wrong. But I also think it's going to be interesting because when we were researching the Mayor Kingpin storyline, half of the problem is also that Mac goes on to be deputy mayor here. Now, I think this is my question because I don't know if I've seen, like, I feel like the conversation they're having in that diner might be what this is, but I don't know for sure. Fisk is actually the one who asks him to be in that role. So that's where a lot of these issues start, because they don't like each other. Regardless of who was asked and by who, they don't like each other. And so I think if they follow this out, this is going to be a very interesting, although slightly different vibe, I think, for Daredevil, because if he is going to be holding a public office position, I think it's going to be so interesting then on the flip side to have somebody who's also a vigilante, and now this bill is proposed and he's like low-key working for the bill because it's not going to be working against him.
Yeah, it is definitely interesting. I honestly, after seeing the diner scene, I don't know that we're going to get the deputy mayor like storyline for Matt.
Because I would think it's either in that scene that he asks him, which seems weird because it appears that, like you said, Kingpin has been mayor for a while already. So if it's not in a scene like that, they are likely not going to be sitting across from each other at a table like that for the rest of the season.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that you were saying, is Matt's a vigilante, but in that conversation, Kingpin asks Matt, why did you hang up the mask? Why did you stop being a vigilante? Obviously, we know that Matt doesn't hold on to that for long in this show
Yeah.
because we have plenty of scenes of him, donning the mask and doing the things. But
He also has done this once before and how'd that work for him?
yeah, I mean, Matt is Daredevil, whether he wants to admit it or not. But I think it's worth pointing out that, potentially for pieces of the blip and in the post blip era, he has felt like he hasn't needed to do that. So I will be curious too, like what drives him to pick it back up, when he has clearly been trying to handle justice out in the open versus the way he had been doing it as Daredevil. And I think that does kind of, play into your conversation about him being deputy mayor because now he doesn't have that conflict. But I still don't think that he's going, like, I think his passion, if he's going to not be Daredevil in terms of like ensuring justice, is more in the courtroom than it is like as a politician. I don't think we've ever really seen those types of ambitions from Matt. I mean, we know, I believe it's in the third season, Foggy, I think, goes out or runs for attorney general at a certain point, and then he like pulls back and, decides not to continue his candidacy. But I think we've seen that Foggy might have those ambitions for a higher office, but I've never seen those, inklings from Matt. So I just want to point that out as well. Like, I just don't know that it's what he wants when what he wants is to be in the courtroom, in the trenches, doing those types of things. And he's not being a vigilante right now. So he has even more incentive to be kind of on the ground doing things in the courtroom because he's not doing stuff, at night and like bashing people's heads in.
I actually want to pick up on the line where you said about him not being a vigilante right now, because I think this goes back to the timeline situation. We know that Echo had flashbacks, and it was about a year ago from Echo's like current present day that we saw Maya fight Daredevil. This was probably around the Hawkeye timeline, roughly. That being said, we know that so like that it was either during the snap in those 5 years or not, but it means that he has still felt the need to wear it before. So I am kind of tight. Like I guess I'm trying to say it's not like at the end of season 3, which would have been now 7 years ago, possibly
7 or 8,
Yeah.
depending on whether this is 25 or 26. Yeah.
Right. It's not like that was the end. That's where he didn't. Because here's the other thing. Yes, he wore it in She-Hulk. That was different. That was on the other coast too, wasn't it? She wasn't even over here.
Yeah.
So I don't even count that. What you do on one side of the country does not even count on the other side. Like in
What happens
superhero
on the
terms,
West Coast stays in the West Coast.
listen, in superhero terms, I mean, why do you think all the West Coast Avengers are out here literally paying no attention? Like New York is on fire every other week, and they're like, "Oh, that sucks for them."
It's so far away.
Yeah, they're like, "Oh, we're not doing too poorly over here." So I don't think that counts. But my point being is it hasn't been 7 or 8 years. He's had that Daredevil suit on in New York City fighting Kingpin.
That is true.
So that's something to kind of keep note of too. Like that gap is not as long as it appears that it could have been. And that's what Echo has confirmed for us. We know he's worn it. So I do really want to know why he seemingly has quote unquote hung it up. Because to what you also said, he's not doing that permanently. We know that.
Yeah, I would actually be curious if it was like almost tied to the blip and like he was active through the snap, because we know that those 5 years were extremely chaotic, and especially right after, a lot of people taking advantage of the situation and the fact that like there was a lot of chaos. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was very active through the blip and then through the period between the snap and the blip. And then when the blip happened and kind of everything resumed quote unquote normal, if he was like, okay, well, things are like not that bad, like I'll, let the kind of authorities take it from here. I think one thing that I've been thinking a lot about, like what draws him back to taking up the mantle again, is White Tiger, right? Like what has changed? We see Bullseye in custody. I think he's gonna obviously break out at some point. And then we see White Tiger. And White Tiger's a new character for this iteration for Born Again. They did not exist in the first 3 seasons. I'm just going to give a quick rundown and then we kind of go into this. But White Tiger is also a vigilante. His alter ego is Hector Ayala. Basically, he has this like tiger jewelry that like gives him powers. And there are other members of his family that do also become White Tiger. He is someone who collaborates with Daredevil and also Shang-Chi and Iron Fist. So interesting kind of contemporaries there.
Those all make perfect sense to me.
Yeah, no, it totally does. All really, really good fighters. And so I just think that one thing that we could be seeing in this show that kind of brings Matt back to Daredevil is all right, well, he kind of left a vacuum in, hanging up the horns. And now this person has stepped in. If he doesn't agree with White Tiger's methods, I mean, I'd be hard pressed to find anybody who's more violent than Matt and Frank Castle, but whatever. If he doesn't agree with White Tiger's methods, maybe he feels like, well, I got to do it myself because I don't agree with how you're doing it. So let me come back and you're more dangerous than I am. And however he, justifies that. But between that and maybe Bullseye getting out, who that is a definite like nemesis there, like they have personal beef. Not that I don't think he's ever unmasked to Bullseye, but Bullseye really hates Daredevil. Like, and they also he paraded around as Daredevil for part of season 3. So there's like a whole lot of stuff there. And I just think between those two things, I could see those kind of in conjunction being the reason that Matt's like, yep, I got to step back into it. It's my time.
Well, you actually brought up the Punisher, and we'll get to him in a second because we know he actually makes another appearance here. But I think Matt didn't agree with his tactics, and we saw that play out in season 2.
Yeah.
That was the whole premise. He didn't agree with how he was doing it, even if he was killing criminals and people who were not good people. And so, while I love Matt, I do think a lot of his crux comes from one, he believes wholeheartedly in making Hell's Kitchen better, which I'm not sitting here saying that's a bad thing, but he also thinks he's the only one who's capable of doing that.
Yeah. There's a big righteousness streak in Matthew Murdock.
For sure. And I think that is going to be a huge aspect to, I kind of like that theory of White Tiger being the one trying to step in to fill almost a power vacuum in its own way of saying, like, well, Daredevil's not here, but I can be.
Yeah.
And Matt being like, hold on. I was fine not being a vigilante. I was fine not being Daredevil. But not if some random dude in another suit's gonna show up and try and do the job. Well, then I should just be the one doing it. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna have my city in the hands of somebody else. And so I definitely think that's a great idea of where that's going to go, because I would imagine they'd want to keep somebody like White Tiger on the playing field. We were talking a lot about this with Captain America too, though, and seeing who was left on the board. We walk out of a lot of movies with either a villain fully defeated, killed, whatever it takes to end it, and we never will see them again. We call them their one movie villains, one show villains. It is what it is. But I would think these types of characters that kind of float a lot in the gray have a lot more potential. I mean, hey, guys, we have an entire movie coming up based on characters that float in the gray, headed again by one of the characters that at this point has been in the MCU arguably one of the longest.
Yeah.
Like, that is just because these characters have so much to say to them. And to how you were saying, there's a connection to Shang-Chi, there's a connection to Iron Fist, which we also already know that Matt has as Daredevil. Well, and Matt in general has, because obviously he knows his identity. But regardless, I just pictured him with Jessica's scarf wrapped around his face trying to be like,
honestly though,
like,
that
wait.
fight scene of the four of them together is so cool. Like
Oh,
that
yes.
shot, that like the series of scenes of them going into that building. I forget, it's whatever the building the hand owns, and they're going in there and like fighting all those guys. Oh my god, that like literally to this day, I was watching it years ago, to this day like gives me chills. It's such a good fight scene. It's so good.
Oh, it's extremely well done. I just started picturing him with the scarf wrapped around his face, and they're sitting in the Chinese restaurant, and I'm just like, dude, what are you doing? But I mean, I think when you have connections like this, and you do have, I mean, Iron Fist and him did go up against the Hand together. And these are skilled fighters that all fit into a very similar bucket. I would think you'd want to keep them around. So I think it'll be very interesting. I hope, like a lot of the other seasons, it's not as okay. Obviously, I didn't see the trailers for the other seasons, but I will say I want it to not be an obvious thing. So while I am looking at this and I'm saying Kingpin's going to be a problem, White Tiger's going to be a problem to some degree, Bullseye's going to be a problem to some degree, all the other seasons have managed to mislead you in some way, shape, or form to still allow it to be an exciting thing. So I'm hoping that's where we're going because as of right now, I see 3 players on the board that concern me and where this is going, and not like in a plot way. I mean, like literally, like I am concerned for Matt.
Yeah. Well, he's clearly going to be dealing with a lot. I mean, like when you're like the mayor of the city, knows your alter ego, knows that, you're his nemesis, both from a hi, I'm Matt Murdock and a hi, I'm Daredevil standpoint. And then you have this exceptionally skilled individual who literally cannot miss. That's why he's called Bullseye, who hates your guts and is also like imbalanced. Like truly the man lugged around a dead body of a girl he was obsessed with. Like he is not right in the head. He hates you and you're the reason he's locked up. Kingpin broke his back, so he also hates Kingpin. And so there's like that's like a trio of like my enemy is my enemy of my enemy is my friend question mark. I don't know. So that's a whole thing. Then you have this new guy coming in to fill this, to your point, like power vacuum. Where does he come in? I don't know. Matt's going to be busy. Do I think that there's still something more that could happen there? For sure. I mean, Bullseye is not necessarily the kind of guy who is going to mastermind his own plan. He is a guy who does better with direction, maybe, I would say. Is there somebody who picks up on his animosity against Kingpin or his animosity against Daredevil and uses that? I don't know. That's entirely possible. Is there someone who, if Daredevil decides to step in when White Tiger is trying to do his thing, steps in there and says, okay, hey, I don't like that guy either. Maybe we should team up. And you actually have a bigger player in the background. That's entirely possible. And that bigger player doesn't have to be Kingpin because he has even bigger fish to fry, namely running the entire city of New York and keeping whatever criminal empire he's still got going on the DL and away from the spotlight.
Yeah, I think it's going to be busy, but not in a way that I'm concerned.
Agreed.
Because again, you have 9 episodes to play this out. You normally had 13. That's fine. I do think I'm intrigued to see how that does pan out because I feel like we've seen other shows in general struggle a little bit trying to hold to a certain amount of episodes. And it seemed like they were trying to fit a story into episodes rather than just tell the whole story and be like,
oh, it happens to be this number.
yeah, if it's 14 episodes instead of 9, or if it's 7 episodes instead of 6, for us to actually have like a successful ending, because, fine. And I'm not saying that's the concern here, but I will say when the cadence has been 13, 13, 13, I am a little like, okay, we'll see how it works to fit it into a 9-episode season. But we also mentioned the Punisher, who is at least making one appearance in this show, which, again, I like it for the continuity. It's the same thing the Defenders universe has been doing. It's the same thing that makes it work. When you have the references, when you have them pop up, even in an episode or two of each other's shows, whatever, fine, but it works because it keeps them connected and it keeps you telling the story of these characters that are all in New York, because this is not our constant thing with New York heroes. So I do think it makes sense for him to appear here. I want to know how. I want to know why. I want to understand what his role is and is it going to be significant? I mean, he looks disheveled. My guy looks like he's seen better days. And I can't believe I'm saying that because he looked more put together after his wife and kids were murdered. Like, my guy has clearly gone through something else that has been more traumatic. So I am intrigued to kind of see how he plays the role in this series as well, because I do feel like we never really got the proper team up I wish we'd gotten with the two of them in season 2. I feel like we were leading up to it, and I do think the Punisher played a helpful role, of course, in that final battle with the hand, with Elektra and everything. But I don't feel like it was like, I feel like that was leading into something we didn't fully get. So I wouldn't be against seeing even an episode where the two of them are taking somebody down together. I think that'd be cool. But again, we're putting a lot of characters on this board that I'm hoping pan out very nicely.
Yeah, I think at one point I either read or heard that Matt enlists Frank to basically do something that he's unwilling to do. So that was what I had heard, like a rumor that people were talking about. I don't know if someone in the cast said it and it like got blown out on the internet or what, but that was what I was hearing about how he kind of gets brought in. I don't know. I mean, I also don't exactly remember how season 2 of The Punisher ended, to be honest, so I don't know why. Like, if I'm remembering correctly, I think the last scene is him, donning the iconic vest and kind of going in and doing his thing. But he has this whole storyline with a young girl who he saves, and he kind of like becomes her like father figure. And so I don't know if like that is maintained. If something, I mean, happened to her, like that could explain. I think they're still together at the end of the season 2, if I'm remembering correctly. So if something happened to her, I could see that if maybe, that puts him over the edge to lose another family member and he really kind of loses it from there. That would be my best guess. But again, like it's been a hot minute since I've seen season 2. And we definitely haven't seen Frank since then. So we don't have any clues to really fill in the blank when it comes to him, not the way that we do for Kingpin and Matt.
I actually wonder if he's somebody who is very negatively affected by the snap and blip.
Yeah.
I think you can't ignore. I mean, listen, I really enjoy Frank. However, with his military background, my guy needs a little bit of assistance. Becoming the Punisher was probably not the normal track to people who are now out of the military and dealing with things, let alone the fact that then their family is murdered.
By their like friend.
Yeah. Yeah. So probably could have used like a really, really good therapist.
Yeah.
I would recommend. So I could actually see kind of the final tipping point for Frank being if something like the snap happened, whether to him or to someone he loved. Although it would be quite interesting to see if it happened to him, because I feel like Frank's also the type of guy who he feels really grounded in a situation he can control.
Yeah.
And while he can't control it on either side, I think coming back and coming into a world, because that's in alignment to his issues with what happened in his personal life. He was away, he came home and everything was so different. And then, what? Not even like 2 days later, he lost his entire family. So I do actually think it could be very interesting because I see that parallel for him to be brought back and now the world is just so different again. But in a way that this time he doesn't have his family. This time he doesn't have something to come back to either. So I do think that could be really interesting, regardless of whether he is snapped or not. I think maybe that could kind of be that thing for him that sets him off finally, because it's a complete lack of control on his behalf.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I didn't even think about the fact that obviously he would have had to have dealt with that, whether as a someone who remained or someone who was snapped and then returned. Either way, that's got to have some serious psychological ramifications. And then to your point, taking that with someone who did serve and we know, suffered from PTSD from the first season, like that is openly something that he suffers and that he struggles with. Then you take on the personal trauma, and like that man really just needs like a big hug. Like he just is really going through a lot of difficult things. Then you add on this huge global level trauma, and it's like, all right, I understand why that might be, for lack of better term, like the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah, I think he's going to be an interesting one. And I do hope the one scene that we see in the trailer, now granted, we've seen a couple clips from a few trailers. I hope it's not it. I hope he's in this a little bit more. But I do want to bring up a random person who makes an appearance that might maybe tell the tone or not. And I remember this from the first trailer. Kamala's dad makes a cameo in the very first trailer that was revealed. And I remember sitting there going, is that Kamala's dad?
Is it? I don't remember that. I mean, I do remember having the conversation now that you say that, actually. Yeah, I mean, look, I love that we're having connections because you talked about it earlier in the episode. Like, this is what made the first few seasons or the first few phases strong and what has really been a weakness of 4 through coming up to 6. So the fact that we're getting that is great. I think also the other thing to think about is she is so close. So we're acknowledging the geography of these characters and the fact that they are not far from one another. Though she is not based in New York, she's based in Jersey City. If she acts as a vigilante in New York, does her dad need to go to a lawyer on her behalf because she broke a law in New York City about being a vigilante? That's the one thing that could be a potential connector there.
I can do one better. The DODC.
Uh,
Yeah. Daredevil actively fought on Peter's behalf against the DODC. He represented him. Guess who also had an entire show based off the DODC, like low-key hunting her? Kamala did. So at the end of the day, that's a huge connection. And also the most annoying group of individuals that have been in the current phases of the MCU. So I think it will be kind of interesting to see if that kind of floats into this as well. And also talking about where maybe Kingpin is. Because the DODC was started by Tony Stark, has since become its own like government agency. I mean, it's kind of one of those things where I think a lot of us are not really sure who they're answering to, who's running them, what they're doing. And so they're in New York for all sorts of reasons. I don't know, but I do know that's probably the more likely connection. And maybe Matt is going to be representing the family or something of that nature. I do think that you can't disregard the fact that maybe with the vigilante law and things like that, but I do have to say she's not, as you pointed out, because she's not like in New York. I feel like that's a little bit of a weaker link than the DODC connection.
I like what you're saying. And I want to throw a few things out there. One, just to make sure I'm remembering correctly, Matt is he's a defense lawyer, right? Yeah, because he defends Frank in season 2.
Yeah.
He's his defense lawyer.
Yes.
So here's a question for you. Is there a world in which Nelson, Murdoch, and Page begins to specialize in cases defending people against the DODC?
Well, and this is what I was wondering, because I remember back during She-Hulk, we were all talking about, like, wouldn't it be cool if every episode was just her covering, like, a random superhero case?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously not all of them are going to be, like, Spider-Man, but, like, at least have a few, like, whatever. And I do think there were a few aspects to that, but we never saw that play out. That the show itself had a bigger plot, which you can or cannot love, but whatever. That's why I almost wonder if this was, like, its own field. Like, we were right, but just with the wrong show and with the wrong lawyer.
Well, and they were originally going to make this show more of a, like, law procedural. But the other thing I wanted to say there related to the DODC, because I would love, actually, if that's what Nelson, Murdoch, and Page specialized in, because I think it would allow us to have that element of the, law procedural while still making it relevant to the larger superhero realm, and, like, also just re-emphasize again, like, Matt is existing within the larger universe in a way that they were not able to have him do in the Netflix show. Like, they could bring in certain people, but not others, and obviously not the vast majority. But with the DODC, you were talking about, like, what are they doing? Who are they operating under? I want to bring in some thoughts here. Who is someone that we know works for the US government that is really powerful, that, may have just bought a really, really big piece of real estate in New York? Valentina Allegra de Fontaine. She is the head of the CIA, or big in the CIA. I wouldn't be surprised if the DODC and the CIA either are, like, if the DODC is under the CIA, or they are kind of like sister agencies where she has a lot of pull there, because I could see how they could have very similar missions. Obviously, the CIA is all about intelligence, but the DODC could be kind of their enforcement arm when it comes to folks who are enhanced. So I think that is an important, thing to point out, is you now have Val working in New York. Could she be in cahoots with Kingpin? I don't know. But she also has the pull of the CIA. So all of that kind of could be coming together really nicely. Things that have been kind of part of different properties, but could now be like, all right, I see the connection in between.
I'm actually really curious to see if Thunderbolts fits into this.
Don't forget, Wilson Fisk's enforcer group in the comics is called the Thunderbolts.
I know. And with the possibility, not even the possibility, with this show being set in New York and ending literally like on top of the Thunderbolts premiere. Now, I don't mean to be this person, because we've done it every single time. Almost every time there's been a movie and show overlap, we're like, it would be really cool, guys. It'd be really cool, guys. But while we've had this happen before, I don't feel like we've had it happen so severely to the fact that, like, these movies are happening on top of each other.
Yeah.
Or, I'm sorry, the show and the movie is happening literally, like, the plot themselves and, like, location, which is strange. Also, if you're going to have a team fighting in New York, but you have the mayor actively trying to do a vigilante bill and pass that, clearly there's got to be a little area for some sort of exception, which I wouldn't be shocked if that's the Thunderbolts. I wouldn't be shocked by that. Also, we don't really know where Valentina has her hand at any given time.
Yeah.
So I do think it would be a very interesting overlap in this case, especially because you have the option of kind of playing into some of it. Also, you low key have a congressman involved now
I
on
was
the
just gonna
Thunderbolts.
say,
Like, there are levels to this. And again, everybody's hands, not just Valentina's, everybody's hands are hidden under the table. Nobody knows who's playing what.
yeah, I mean, I do think the political angle is also super interesting. Like, if you're a team that's backed by the mayor of New York, if you've got a congressman, it legitimizes you. Like, then are you even really a vigilante because you're working for the mayor? Like, don't
Exactly.
you have enforcement authority then?
Exactly. You also know we know Valentina's bought Avengers Tower.
Yeah. So it definitely has like a lot of potential for crossover as we start to think about, why did they put this release order the way that it is? Why did they front load so much of the content the way I mean, it's a very busy year no matter how you look at it, but like especially these first few months kind of starting with Cap and moving through, like it is a very intense period of a lot of things going on at the same time, and we know that Cap and Thunderbolts go together because we had, to Katie's point earlier, if you heard the spoiler, pause. If you haven't seen the movie, this is the same spoiler, but I'm giving the warning again. We saw Bucky in that film. It gave us the hint about him being a congressman. That's going to play into his character in the Thunderbolts. There's a connection. So then why wouldn't the show that they scheduled to come out so conveniently in between also have that connection? So I do think that for the first time, probably since we came back from the break, we're actually seeing Marvel maybe intentionally schedule things in a really meaningful way to be like, we're going to tell an actual, like, accelerated story here through these three properties.
Yeah, I don't want to get my hopes up because we've mentioned this before. So I'm not going to get my hopes up any further, but I do want to just mention it because I think it's something that, again, even down to location, like these are happening theoretically if we're in the same time frame, these could be happening pretty on top of each other. And where he is as far as who's mayor might be just as important for the storyline. So it could be very interesting. It's an option to put out there. I'm not going to bank on it, but it's definitely something to kind of just keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah, for sure. I think that is pretty much it for me because I don't really know, other than the Mayor Kingpin storyline, what they'll be covering in this show. All I'm going to say is I am incredibly hyped. The trailers have been incredible. It looks like the fight scenes are going to be, I mean, as amazing as they were in the Netflix show. And I'm just really, really excited to have all these characters back. I'm excited for how intense it's going to be because this show is nothing if it's not intense. So bring it on. Daredevil Born Again. I'm excited. And on that note, if you're looking forward to our weekly coverage of Daredevil Born Again, please make sure that you're following on your podcast platform of choice, checking out the website where we have our calendar, which will be up to date soon. Sorry. And or will be updated by the time that you listen to this. And you can also support the show if you would be so inclined via our Buy Me a Coffee link linked below.
You guys can also follow the show on all of our socials, which are linked in the show notes down below as well. And we are in our Daredevil Born Again era, as we've obviously already covered. So next week, we are covering episodes 1 and 2 already. They are dropping Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So for us, that's late. And therefore, we will be recording then our episodes on Wednesday, meaning our episodes will be dropping on Saturdays for the remainder of the Daredevil timeline, just because we need to edit and also not record at 10 or 11 o'clock at night. So that is going to be our release schedule moving forward. Make sure you guys are getting ready for that. Be looking out for our episodes as they are coming out. We will be having also subsequent blog posts as we usually do with the shows, which should, as things go hopefully well, be dropping before the episode on like a Thursday or Friday, depending on my ability to actually write it. Either way, we hope you guys are excited about Daredevil being around the corner. We know this one is probably one of the most hyped up shows, honestly, in a really long time, and we agree. We're right there on that bandwagon. So don't worry, we're excited. We hope you guys are too, as Marvel just blew your mind. So let's talk about it.